Okay, so let's talk about your role as a founder. Now, hopefully, you watched the last video where we kind of envisioned a model that was around 5 classes of kids, of teachers, about 75 kids. That's just our sample model. You can think of that as high schoolers, little kids, whatever. Just this is what you're envisioning. Okay. Now, you as a founder, you could be a parent, you could be a teacher. I don't know who you are as an entrepreneur who's thinking about doing this. Very often you are a teacher who is wanting to deliver the type of education that you believe in to the kids, or perhaps you're looking for an alternate career path. But there also are a lot of parents who are looking for something for their children and they can't find what they're looking for. So they're becoming the entrepreneur. Okay. So in either case, what I want you to think about is, you're envisioning this private school program that's running 2 or 3 days a week through a good part of the school year, with classroom teachers and your administrator. Where do you see yourself in that? Okay. Now, let's just talk about the practical part of it. Okay. Now, depending where you live and the number of hours and how long your days are and all of that stuff, there's a whole variety of things that we talk about as far as the budget and the pay and the tuition and all of that. That's a whole thing that you need to understand before you get started and have a plan for. But right now, if you're just thinking about that, and I'm going to give you a little more information on the money here. Let's say that the tuition is about $3,200 per child. Okay. And they're paying a little over $3,000 let's say between $3,000 and $3,500 for tuition. Okay. Your teachers are probably going to be making roughly $15,000 a year. There's a big variation on that. But again, they're working probably 2 days a week for the school year. Okay. We all know that teachers do a lot of prep time. They have a lot of responsibility. They're working outside of the classroom as far as getting ready. And I could talk more about the details of how to write all of that up at some other time. But what you're envisioning is they're in the classroom for about 6 or 7 hours a day. They've got some prep to do. They need to be good with the kids. They need to have experience for managing kids. They need to know how to teach the materials, right? But they're also only working about a third of what a normal school teacher would work. Okay, so if they're making roughly $15,000 a year, give or take a little bit, okay? Your administrator, and let's just for our purposes say that there's one like director, let's call them a director, and there's just one person and 5 teachers. Let's just picture that for now. And I'm going to say that this director is responsible for hiring the teachers, which means describing the teaching position, advertising, taking applications, interviewing, training the teachers, as well as supporting them, coaching them through difficulties, meeting with them regularly, and probably having staff meetings, that kind of thing. Okay. We're going to say that this director is responsible for that. That's like the teacher supervision part of it. Okay. And I'm going to simplify things because this is doable with a 5 classroom model. We're going to say that person is also responsible for all of the administrative part of it. Okay. All the admissions, student information, tuition billing, safety policies, the accountant, the bookkeeper. Hopefully they're not actually doing all of that, but they're hiring someone to do it, running payroll, making sure the insurances are purchased, coming up with the planning budget for the year. All of that is the director. Okay. They are probably working not just the part-time as far as like those 2 days a week. They're probably working closer to full-time. With 2 days a week just during the school year, they're probably not working 40 hours a week. They might get close to it the first year when they're first launching, but they're probably not having to work quite 40 hours a week, but they're probably working easily between 20 and 30 hours a week. Okay. And probably including the summer, because the summer is busy for the director. Okay. So for them, they're working a little over half, 3/4 of a full-time job throughout most of the year. So they're probably making, and again, this is going to depend a lot on whether it's a nonprofit or an LLC, but we're just going to say, we're going to say that it's more of the nonprofit, private, not elite private school, but like more of like a Christian school sort of model that's more missional, nonprofit, like missional. They might be making more like $30,000 to $40,000 a year. Okay. And that's, again, for a little less than full-time. And they're responsible for a lot. They're responsible for compliance and legal stuff. They're responsible for safety, budget, financial, basically the financial officer and all of that. Plus they're supervising the teachers. That's just one way to do it. You could have two people. You could have, sharing those responsibilities, but not sharing, specializing in one section of each of those responsibilities. I suppose they could share it, but that could get a little difficult for the teachers to like know who their boss is or whatever. It's better for, at least for people interaction, for the teachers to know who the authority is, who to go to with issues. So you could split that, and then each person would be working less, who might be working 25 hours, and then the other person might be working 10 hours or something like that. Anyway, that director is probably making between $30,000 and $40,000 a year, and they're not working full time. Okay. So that's doable. Okay. And the students are paying probably $3,000 to $3,500. That is a budget that can work. Okay. And in that, you're also going to have a little bit of money set aside to pay a bookkeeper, to get your taxes done by an accountant, to hire a payroll company. There's infrastructure that you need. You can't be an expert in all those things, even as a director, but you do need to know what needs to be done. And then you need to be able to like delegate it, find it, and manage it, even if someone else is taking care of it. Okay. So that can be what that looks like. Now, if we extend the thought experiment a little bit and say, well, I need a full-time income, you need full-time income, but you're the founder. Okay. So this is a part-time program. It's a hybrid program. You could, and I would strongly suggest that before you get super excited about this idea, even though a lot of places really certainly have a demand for this, but you kind of test your market out first. Part of like strategically planning, if you want to use that word, like a successful business, is making sure that people want what it is you're offering. So depending on like where your competition is, like, what other things are offered out there, like, are you going to be the only program like this anywhere in your area? And is there a ton of people in your area? Well, you're probably going to have a pretty good market. Okay. But if you're in a very rural area, or there's just different types of schools on every corner where you live, or it's possible people don't have a lot of money, or they're just really spread out, there just aren't a lot of people, you want to kind of test that. And I have ideas for that. You can go to my website, starthybridSchool.com, and I have a little like course on that and some ideas on that. But essentially what you're doing is you're probably going to have like send out some surveys. You're going to like kind of poke your nose into the corners where these people are hanging out and be like, hey, how are you feeling about your school options and all that? I won't go into all of that right now, but I would really suggest that you test your market first for any hybrid program, but especially if you're trying to run like multiple programs, multiple hybrid programs, so that you have basically a full-time business like for yourself. So let's say that you wanted to run a 2-day program and then another 2-day program and then have like an enrichment day. Okay. Now you are going to be working 40 hours a week for sure. And you're probably going to need to hire some help. If you're the director, you may also be a teacher. And well, we'll talk a little bit about how you can be a teacher if you also need to be the founder, because in a larger program, that's not always going to work very well, but it's not impossible. Anyway, just because it's like two jobs. But if you have a 2-day program, and then an enrichment day, or 2-day and 3-day or something like that, and it's essentially a full-time program, and you're director, you're working full-time, maybe you have an administrative assistant, you have multiple employees, and now that $30,000 to $35,000 a year can become $60,000 to $70,000, possibly even $80,000 if you're working a lot. Now, I'm talking on a level of like not high tuition. Okay, there are a lot of programs that are charging $4,000 or $5,000 or $6,000. In my experience and in my opinion, honestly, one of the huge advantages of hybrid schooling, because you have to have a parent home to hybrid school. They don't have to be home. We've got full-time parents who also hybrid school. But in general, the market for hybrid schooling is not to full-time income parents, because they're at work and it's hard to homeschool, even hybrid homeschool, when both parents are working full-time. So they're usually one-income families, or what I call one-income plus, as in they're, one income, and then often usually the mom, not always, is working like part-time, right? And they often have young children, little ones also. So charging $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, or $9,000, $10,000 which is often what the micro schools will charge higher, a little higher, because they're usually more hours and it, it's just a slightly different model, is outside of their price range. Okay. So one of the advantages of a hybrid school is it's a little more affordable, in the $3,000 range is just within the reach of more people. Still not everybody, but still in the reach of a lot more people. But if you were in an area where people could handle $4,000 or $5,000 in, they can manage that, enough people can manage that, then you may be able to charge a little more and offer more robust programming, and, money it's not rocket science to realize that if you're bringing in more money, you're going to be able to pay people more money. But that's a whole decision you have to make that's both missional and vision, but also practical and practical as far as who your market is, who these people are, and what they're actually going to be able to, pay. So anyway, that's just stuff to think about, to give you more information on the budgeting and planning the budget and all of that. But all of that to say, I wanted to help you to envision what it could look like for it to be part-time work, what it could look like to be full-time work, as well as the realities of what your market is going to want and what you want to be able to offer. Now, I'll just say about the teacher position. So if you're the one who's well, I want to be in the classroom with the kids, that's what I love doing. That's what I want to do. I don't want to, manage payroll and stuff like that. Well, one, you might want to think about doing a micro school instead, because in a micro school, there's a whole lot less administration, although there certainly is some, but it's just less of it because you might only have a dozen kids and that's all you're ever going to have. You might be multi-age and you just want to teach the kids. Okay. You might want to think about doing a micro school if that's really what you want to be doing. But in a hybrid model, it is possible to be one of the teachers. You might be able to just teach something you really like, part-time, maybe you're teaching, I don't know, math or something like that, if that's what you really enjoy. Or you could be a classroom teacher if you stay small enough and have the support in place and to manage the whole program, safely, but also just supportively. So a lot of times teachers will need support, just practical support. So you probably are going to need an aide. If you're the director and you're there, you can be that support person. I still suggest having an aide if you have any more than 2 classes, even if the director is there full time. That's just part of the organizational structure that I would recommend. But if you're the teacher in the classroom, it's going to be harder for you to be supporting those other teachers. So you might be their boss, but it's hard for you to be in on what they're doing. And I am not a teacher as far as I'm not a teacher. I studied economics and I studied educational leadership. So I'm more of an administrative type thinker, but you could be a lead teacher or have team meetings and all of that. And then hire out the support and the administrative. Someone has to be directing the program. And often it's the founder who wants to be directing the program because it really is a job that needs to be done well. You need to be present with the other teachers. You need to know what's going on. Somebody needs to be doing it. So if you don't want to do that, you're going to need a director of some kind. Okay. Or you have to try to be the director and the teacher at the same time. So just think about what that might look like. But again, depending on what your role is right now, as you're thinking about this, if there's other people in the group that you're, maybe you have a friend or you have 2 or 3, 4 people wanting to create some sort of program and you're well, I just want to be a teacher. Just put me in with the kids. I don't want to think about all this other stuff. You're going to need someone else who's well, I can think about the administration. I can be the director or I can take care of the administrative part and you can be the lead team teacher or whatever. There's a lot more to say about that as far as if you're a nonprofit or an LLC. I'll just briefly say that if it's an LLC, you're the business owner, so you are responsible whether you like it or not. So you're going to have to hire those people that are necessary. But it can be a little weird to be the teacher who's teaching one of the classrooms, and then you're also the boss of the person who's administrating the whole program. It's kind of feels a little upside down. But I'm never one to say things are impossible. Think through what that might look like. But if you're an LLC, you really don't have any other option besides being responsible for everything. If you're a nonprofit, the board is really responsible for appointing The only thing they're responsible for appointing is the executive staff, which is usually like an executive director. And that person is then responsible for all of the other positions. And the only one that's answering to the board is the executive director, the executive staff. In that case, it's usually, in our size model, it's probably going to be the director. But like I said, if you just really want to be in with the kids, which is, then you might want to think more about a micro school model. And I think that is often why we see a lot of micro school. I see a lot of micro schools started by teachers who they just want to teach kids and have their own little teaching business, which is totally fine. It's just a different model. So, okay. So as a founder, that's what you have to think about. Those are just some practical numbers as far as if you want to say affordable is a part-time program and pay people fairly. There's a whole budget you would have to like understand and tweak and variations in it, but you roughly can charge around $300 to $3,500 a year and have 5 teachers and a director and an aide and make, around $15,000 and then, around $30,000 to $35,000 as a director working like those part-time hours. That is doable. So, again, disclaimer, I'm neither a CPA nor a legal person, but I have done all of this before, and that's what the numbers usually work out to. So, okay. So I hope that helped you as a founder thinking about what your role could be in the program. And I would like to talk in another video about taking a really good assessment of what your strengths and weaknesses are also, so you don't put yourself in a place where you're going to struggle with your weaknesses all the time. And I have a section on that in my strategic planning course, because I think it's really, really important just understanding who you are as a person, like whether you're detailer-oriented or big picture, or, you enjoy being with kids, or you like ideas more or whatever, making sure that you're putting yourself in a position where you thrive. And then just with humor and humility, understanding what your own weaknesses are, in the sense that, well, I have these strengths, I'm not so great at these things, but I'm going to put people around me who are good at those things. And I'm going to trust them to do their job well, because I need good people in good places. And that's how you run a successful business, is putting smart, competent, good people around you and trusting them to do their job well, and then stepping into who you are best. That's the best thing to do. So make sure you understand yourself. And I will talk more about that in another video.